Hey again. So today we're going to talk about transforming capitalism. In yesterday's video, at the very end, I started talking about some kind of geeky financial things. And what I really want to explain is something more, more fundamental. So, again, a lot of people say, well, capitalism is bad, but basically, what capitalism is doing is it's serving a kind of an old way of looking at the world. And in that old way of looking at the world, uh, a certain kind of structural abuse is accepted. And so, I mean, inherent in capitalism as a system of relating to money, capitalism is a system of relating to money. And money is something that almost all cultures have spontaneously invented, whether it's trading shells or any kind of even barter. Kids come up with things just naturally. There's a natural tendency to create symbolic value stores because bartering is so inefficient for any culture of more than a relative handful of people. Uh, so any kind of trading culture is going to have money. And I just, an aside, I read something very interesting. The Chinese had invented paper money. The Europeans had money, but they didn't have paper money, and Marco Polo discovered it in China. So you can see the different monetary systems evolved independently of each other in some way. So, again, so capitalism is a way of looking at money. It's an advance, if money itself is a concept, which we'll talk about that in a different video, what is money, but capitalism itself is a set of culturally agreed on ways of looking at money. And then where that boils down is to things like balance sheets and cash flow statements. And as I said yesterday, where you run into trouble there is then now, because of the overall philosophy of capitalism and the notion, the powerful side of it, depends on the notion of profit. And then when you start saying, well, any money we spend on human beings cuts into our profit, now you're starting to get into trouble. And of course, there are other corollaries. For example, running a business in a way that is totally integrated with nature and not polluting, well, that cuts into profit. And so this is really one of the fundamental issues of one of the fundamental flaws of capitalism that needs to be corrected. And you have this tendency to externalize the costs. So let's say you want to make paper and you've got a paper mill. And, well, you say, well, it's just a little bit of pollution we're going to put in the air, and just a little bit of pollution we're going to put in the water. Or, yeah, well, we're going to kill some species when we cut down the trees, but just a few are going to be killed. I'm using environmental rationale and then I'll talk about how that extends to the rationale of basically treating animals as a commodity, So this is one of the challenges. If profit is good, then maximizing profit is good. But one of the outcomes of maximizing profit is trying to push costs from the private domain, in other words, from the company's ledger, pushing it out into the public domain. So that's air pollution. All air pollution is an externalization of costs that should be borne by the company. And the question is, what do you do about it? And the answer, as we described yesterday, is to develop culture. So right now, that's a culturally accepted method of running a business. And the idea that we're going to create rules in the absence of cultural agreement, I think, is naive. So we don't create the rules first and try to force people to comply with the rules that they don't even understand. They don't even get why. Because the current rules are from a past generation. They're from a past generation. A past generation, even 100 years ago, there were maybe under 1 billion humans. And so the combination of population growth and technology growth have created a situation that no one could have imagined. So when there's only 1 billion people, and yes, there was destruction, but it seems so insignificant to the vast reserves of forests and the vast oceans. I mean, it seemed, but if you read about the extinction of the passenger pigeon, or the almost complete wipeout of the American buffalo, and I'm sure there are corollaries all around the world. One of the things that there's a great book called A Forest Journey, and it talks about deforestation from ancient times. So people talk about the cedars of Lebanon. The Middle East used to be full of huge ancient trees. And if you go to China today, you'll see that the old temples and old architecture, the columns are giant old trees. And if you look at Greek architecture and then Roman, those big wooden columns eventually got replaced with stone columns, because once they ran out of trees, they only had was stones. And if you look at the Corinthian column, it looks very much like a tree. It's got a big stalk, and at the top is a leafy design. So when they ran out of trees, so there was deforestation even then, and people could see it, and then that's what created the stone architecture when they ran out of trees for temples and other construction. So human beings have been doing this for a long time, externalizing costs, rationalizing ecological destruction, and of course rationalizing the use of animals as commodities. And so, there's two aspects of veganism. Well, I call this vegan lunch. Animal rights has, to me, two aspects. One is the right to not be used as a commodity. And two, if animals are going to have the right to live, then they need to have they need a place to live, the right to have their own habitat. Now, these ideas are not part of the mainstream, but if we look at what vegans are doing today, they're trying to embody that with their purchases. They're willing to internalize some of these kind of former costs that were externalized. And if you look at the growth of the organic food movement, that also demonstrates something, because really organic food should be cheaper, but it was more expensive. And I don't want to get granular in that yet. That's in maybe a different video. But the people who wanted to purchase organic food were willing to pay more. So as an avant-garde consumer that was willing to pay more to begin to re-internalize the cost of producing agriculture in a more ecologically sound way. So we can see that as these kinds of cutting-edge values, first they start, like anything, they start with the wealthier consumers who are maybe more attuned to, or there are wealthy people who are very attuned to these things, and wealthier classes, the middle class, the upper class, are willing to spend more. And of course, people chastise, oh, you know, it's too expensive. And the fact is, it is a lot of it. There's a lot of hype too. you know, Organic food should be less expensive, except because of the history, hundreds of years of momentum, the non-organic industries had access to politicians, and they used that access to politicians to make laws that make it easier for them to externalize costs, and by doing that, it makes their products cheaper. When we re-internalize the costs of any of these industrial agriculture methods, they instantly become more expensive than organic food. But in these nascent industries, we don't necessarily have the economic power to then go to the political power and re-regulate. And so this is really, if we look at how people have tried to cause change, starts with grassroots political activism, and then this idea of somehow getting a grip on the politics, and then by getting a grip on the politics, then somehow controlling the corporations. I don't remember a time that that's ever been true in the past. Certainly in the U.S., things work exactly the opposite. People aggregate power, and aggregating power is just something that humans have been doing since the dawn of civilization. In every culture, there were kings, but economic power. So really, what we're talking about is, if we want to really change the policies of government, we first have to just build our own economy. But the kind of power that vegans want to have is a soft power, right? We're not interested, most of us, in the kind of violence, the military power. And because it's compassionate movement. So compassion is very powerful. It's just a soft power. So what I'm saying is that we have to, if we want to change capitalism itself, we have to build the commitment. Really, veganism is a commitment to animal rights. That's simple. It's not a diet. If you have that commitment to animal rights, of course, then you're not going to eat them. And that's where the economy begins. But there's so much more when we look at animal rights and apply that to any economic activity. There's so many opportunities to transform the economy. And as I said yesterday, the rights of the air to be clean and blue, except on rainy days. And the rights of water to be drinkable. That you should, it wasn't that long ago, you could just go up to any river and drink. There was no water purification. Now, in some parts of the world, that caused, a lot of problems, but because already the population was getting large, concentrated in human waste. But fundamentally, clean water is an output of natural ecosystems. That's what they do. They make clean water. And instead what we do is we pollute the water, and then we go and we build water filtration and water purification plants. But those plants are so expensive, there's a lot of rationale to simply restoring ecosystems, and there are a lot of economic activity in the area of restoring watersheds. So when we hold these commitments, now we look at any business operation through these core commitments that we might want to create as vegans and as environmentalists. And we start acting and living from those commitments with our purchases. And again, with Vegan Launch, we're living with those commitments through our investment dollars. And of course, any vegan investment opportunity, not just the ones that we work on. And that's where The high level change comes from the commitment. The rule changes is a lower level step, actually. The commitment is first, then the rule changes eventually come, because as vegan business people, now we're generating some income. Now we go to our political leaders, our members of Congress, or the members of Parliament, or the kings, where they still exist, and we say, hey, this rule that you is on the books is preventing us from growing this economy. We would like you to help grow the economy. And this is now when you start getting into changing the laws, because that economic transaction represents a large enough cultural agreement that the politicians can begin changing the rules without a huge backlash. So really, politicians are existing at the balance of power between disagreements. They're not the ones that are going to act like, sole arbiters. So we have to be the arbiters first. We start with commitment. We build businesses inside of that commitment. We change rules inside that commitment. And then finally, that starts getting into the basic principles. Like there's something in the world called, generally accepted accounting principles. Well, right now, if the whole culture agrees that animal eating is fine, and animal abuse is fine, they're going to create little micro rules like that comply and account for an animal's life as a bit of data on a spreadsheet. Or, as I mentioned yesterday, a worker, a human being is just an entry on a spreadsheet now, because that's the cultural agreement. So if we're going to have compassion for animals and compassion for humans, and then we have to start looking at the rules bit by bit. And so I see three ways that people relate to the issue when they don't like capitalism. And I'm not saying I love capitalism, I'm just saying whatever tool's there, if there's some other country that is running on a different system, we still need to be building a vegan and ecological economy there too. We'll just look at their tools too. So we might relate to capitalism or even socialism or communism or any other feudalism. All these things exist in different ways through the world. Tribalism. So we've got 4 different isms and 4 maybe subtly different economic designs. But rather than looking at the ism, we want to look at it again through the lens of what we're committed to and how we're going to change those rules as to fit our commitment. And so otherwise, here are the main options people do. Try to avoid the capitalist system by minimizing their own personal economic activity, just sort of trying to live on the very edge. But still, every time you're using the money of the coin of the realm, you're participating a little. So minimizing or avoiding. The other option is to get angry, so to yell and to protest and fight. So passivism or conflict, those are the 2 ends, and the other is engagement, peaceful engagement. That's what, again, you may not agree with me. If you agree with me, that's what I'm doing. That's what I believe in, is peaceful engagement with the system with my commitments. You bring your commitment to peaceful engagement. Why do I do this? Because I've done a lot of experiments. And those experiments they just prove to me that that's very powerful. Peaceful engagement. And I'm going to just end this with something, because I think peace sometimes has gotten a bad name, a bad feeling. The idea that, if you're going to be for peace, you're putting yourself at risk. I'm asking people, do not take risks. Don't take risks with your money. Don't take risks with your body. Don't put your body on the line. Don't put your money on the line. Those are violent types of activities in a subtle way. They're violent to yourself, and I'm against violence. I'm for peace, really. I'm not really against violence. Of course I am, but I mean, I'm for peace. And so when you take extreme risks, now you're putting yourself in a state of fear, a state of potential scarcity. And it's in those states of fear and scarcity that people rationalize violent acts. So again, if we want to transform capitalism, feudalism, communism, socialism, we do that by bringing our commitments to something much higher: compassion, clean air, clean water, abundant forests, healthy oceans, and with all those things together, and then animal rights, the right to not be a commodity, the right to not be an entry on somebody's spreadsheet. And we want that for humans as well. And so when we have those core principles, then we can start building businesses around those, get them a little transactional, grow them, teach more people, and the success breeds success. And meanwhile, we use the tools that are at our fingertips. They're not perfect. Capitalism's not perfect. None of these isms are perfect. Money itself is not perfect. In a perfect world, there would be no need for money. My request to you is that we get started.